on the Burushaski Indo-European hypothesis. It belongs to a small and remote community which has never played any role in history nor contributed anything to the development of civilization. These rather harsh words written about Burushaski featured in the 1935 preface to Lorimer's groundbreaking work on the language. Now, whilst it might be true that the Burushaski speaking community is small and remote, its story is also endlessly fascinating, because their unique language, culture and religious practices have persisted despite the encroachment of foreign languages, alien customs and the pressures of an ever globalised world. So let's rewind for a moment, because although Lorimer was one of the first people to produce a substantial work concerning Burushaski, his take on the community is completely wrong. Let's start maybe with this cool line about a dragon filled with treasure from a Burushaski folktale. Before the prince, along the road, appeared a snake, who had turned itself into a dragon. So great it looked, it appeared as if the dragon could snatch the length of road into its mouth. The prince came forward with his sword and attacked the mouth of the dragon, hacking the dragon into 3 pieces. Of these pieces, the prince noticed one was larger than the others. After fetching some juniper wood to build a fire, he burned the piece of dragon, and after many days the fire finally died down to reveal the gold which had been hidden in its intestines. Local law among some Burusha holds that their ancestors were 5 soldiers from the army of Alexander the Great, and although the community is now predominantly Muslim, many pre-Islamic traditions and rituals have been observed and recorded. For example, some make altar offerings of juniper and hold a belief in Pari, spirits who inhabit sacred uplands and mountain peaks. These Pari can either hinder those who offend them or assist those who honour them properly. Any traveller through the highlands would do well to ensure the Pari are on their side before embarking on a journey. Hello everybody and welcome. We're back again with another one of these videos. Today we're going to be talking about the Burushaski language and its possible origins in Indo-European. Burushaski is an intriguing language spoken by a truly fascinating people, and it's often termed the Basque of South Asia. Burushaski really is a linguistic gem. Join me as we explore the language's unique features and discuss some of its proposed connections with Indo-European and beyond. Burushaski is a language of approximately 130,000 native speakers located in the following regions. Typically, it has been considered a language isolate, meaning, perhaps predictably, it has gathered significant attention from any and every linguist interested in language macrofamilies or hypothetical proto-languages. Sadaf Munshi, in her excellent doctoral dissertation, produced an essential reference work on the Jammu and Kashmir variety of Burushaski. Her comprehensive study covers Burushaski phonology, morphology and syntax. And she also highlights the similarities and differences between Jammu and Kashmir Burushaski and neighbouring languages. Munshi notes that there are some similarities in phonological and structural systems between Burushaski and its neighbours. Munshi also points out significant differences in nominal and verbal morphology. Munshi and other scholars knowledgeable in Burushaski, such as Smith and Wilson, seemed therefore content to consider the language as an isolate. This is because despite the fact its lexicon demonstrates heavy influence from neighbouring languages, its grammatical structure differs considerably, Therefore, in many reference materials, Burushaski remains classified as a language isolate. Here we have a map of the Burushaski speaking regions and some of the languages and language families surrounding it. Let's go over some of the characteristic features of Burushaski. It has 36 consonants, including retroflex varieties, alongside 5 vowels with length distinction. Word order is verb final. There are numerous endings to mark the plural, around 50 according to some sources. It has a split ergative alignment, which we can actually see here. The Burushaski verbal morphology is complicated to say the least, and the verb can be modified with a number of prefixes and suffixes. Double agreement marked on verbs in the forms of a prefix and a suffix is commonplace. Verb suffixes agree with the subject, whilst the exact nature of the prefix marking is debated. However, it is likely to show agreement either with the direct or indirect object. However, others believe it is more likely they function as differential object markers. Take a look at some of these examples. Ergative markers appear on the noun phrase, and Burushaski nouns are divided into 4 classes. Here we can see the Burushaski case marking system. Burushaski also has this curious category of possession in names of body parts and kinship terms, things like this, that must always be expressed by pronominal forms prefixed to the noun. So you can't just say arm, you always need to say something like my arm or your arm. In terms of vocabulary, Parkin states that Burushaski has absorbed a number of terms from neighbouring Indo-European languages such as Shina and Dumaka, but also loans have been identified from Tibeto-Burman. Scholars have also noted that a large portion of the contemporary Burushaski lexicon consists of loans. Now, I feel it's important at this point to point out that despite a reasonably large body of literature concerning the language, there is still much disagreement among scholars about certain aspects of the language, particularly morphology. And, as Smith points out, a comprehensive grammar is still lacking, and the existing sketches that we do have often focus highly on one particular dialect and aren't necessarily representative of Burushaski as a whole. So if you take the words language and isolate and put them together, it can have a kind of hypnotic, almost intoxifying effect for a certain breed of linguist. Now, I'm going to put my hands up here. I kind of share that weakness too, even though I'm not so quick to lump everything together as perhaps some other researchers are. But I can understand how it becomes a kind of life quest for some linguists to find a home for whatever language isolate they're interested in. Some way of attaching it to a macro language family or constructing a proto-language for it. And of course, Burushaski, being a language isolate, has attracted a lot of attention in that regard. Let's take a look at some of the proposals trying to find a home for Burushaski. Firstly, Burushaski doesn't feature in any typical flavour of the Eurasiatic nor Nostratic language family. Burushaski has, however, been included in the so-called Dené-Caucasian language family, most notably by Bengston in 1997. There are a few different versions of the hypothesis and the languages that are included in it. To most people, it would appear as a motley grouping, to say the least. However, it does have the backing of a handful of notable linguists. Bengston, as we mentioned, but also Blazek and Ruchlen. Some of these names might be familiar from my previous videos. Unfortunately, we can't go too deeply into the Dené-Caucasian language family here due to time constraints. There is quite a lot of material on Dené-Caucasian, and this hypothetical language family might one day get its own video. In fact, to be honest, I think it deserves one, but let me know anyway in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. However, what I will say is that the evidence linking Burushaski to this language family is primarily based on the fact that all of the languages show a highly developed system of prefixing, both nominal and, more significantly, verbal. Additionally, the sequencing of affixes is somewhat similar among the constituent languages. There are some interesting lexical correspondences, and the body of work concerning the proposed language family continues to grow. And I'll be the first to admit that some of the shared characteristics, particularly concerning morphology, might warrant further investigation. However, as it stands, I remain somewhat unconvinced. That being said, there is one curious sub-relationship, and that's between Burushaski and Yeniseian, a language family from central Siberia. The idea is that these two language families formed their own distinct family, named Karasuk by Vandriem, after an archaeological complex in Siberia associated with the Yeniseians. This language family is also known as Greater Yeniseian. The proposed Karasuk language family focuses on connecting only these two language groups. Vandriem, based on some archaeological work by Klenova, speculates that the northern dialect of this family moved north and developed into the Yeniseian languages, while the southern dialect moved south and merged with the peoples who later became the Indo-Aryans, although they remained linguistically distinct. According to Bengston, the relationship between these two language groups is based on a limited number of lexical parallels and correspondences between pronouns and affix usage. Currently, the evidence supporting this connection is underwhelming and hasn't received much scholarly attention. Further research into these proposed connections may well be valuable. There are some other, more narrower attempts to link Burushaski with other language families. Most notably, various attempts to link it to varieties of languages spoken in the Caucasus. More recently, for example, in 2015, linguist Jan Henrik Holst has attempted to show a specific genetic relationship between Burushaski and Kartvelian. This hypothesis is somewhat in its infancy, so again it will be worthwhile to see how it develops. Now, how about Burushaski's famous proposed connections with Indo-European? Well, according to Alexander Smith in his overview of Burushaski in the following book, linguist Hermann Berger, well known for his work on Burushaski, suggested that the language may be related to pre-Proto-Indo-European. Eric Hamp, another well-known and capable linguist who also had a tendency for lumping languages together, suggested Burushaski is a sister to Proto-Indo-Anatolian. In fact, we can actually take a look at Hamp's proposed Indo-European tree here. And actually, Eric Hamp is an interesting character because he seemed to have developed a tendency for sparking people's interest in genetic relationships between languages, because he is also attributed by John Colarusso as giving him the idea for the Proto-Pontic hypothesis. Recently, well, from like 1998 onwards, Chashule has published a number of papers concerning his proposed connection between Burushaski and Indo-European. I've counted, or I think I've read, 16 of those papers. There could be one or two extra that I've missed, but there's a substantial number of papers that he's produced on the issue. And alongside his work on Burushaski and Indo-European, Chashule has also published and lectured on Indo-European studies in general, and at present he works as an associate professor at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And basically today we're going to take a look at Chashule's work and see if there's any substance to it. Now obviously we can't cover all of his published material, so we're going to limit ourselves to just 2 papers today. But they are key papers. Firstly, his 2023 paper, The Indo-European Origins of the Burushaski Language and the Dené-Caucasian Hypothesis, published in the Journal of Asian Civilizations. I chose this particular article so we have something up to date covering the state of the art concerning Chashule's thinking. And we're going to be taking a look at this 2012 paper, Correlation of the Burushaski pronominal system with Indo-European and Phonological and Grammatical Evidence for a Genetic Relationship. And I chose this paper because it's actually his most cited work and should be easy for others to get their hands on. Chashule provides us with 2 language tree models that help us with understanding his thinking around the exact nature of the relationship between Burushaski and Indo-European. The first looks like this, and as we can see, it shows us that Burushaski can be considered as a sister language to Proto-Indo-European. Very similar, in fact, to how Blevins sees the relationship between Basque and Proto-Indo-European. This is the first possibility that Chashule considers. The second, based on the fact that, according to Chashule, Burushaski shares a closer lexical affinity to the so-called Northwest Indo-European languages. In particular, the affinity is strongest with the languages of the Balkans, Phrygian being the closest. We will look into the Phrygian connection later, but at this point it is important to acknowledge that Chashule has flip-flopped between both positions during the course of his publication history, but at present Chashule sees the second position, that is, an alignment closer to Northwest Indo-European, as being more likely. So what evidence does Chashule bring to the table concerning any proposed relationship between Indo-European and Burushaski? Well, the 2023 paper is actually quite interesting because it's Chashule's response to a critique of the Indo-European origins of Burushaski by Bengtsson and Blazek. Now this is useful for us because Chashule brings out all of his big guns in the paper, his most convincing arguments to prove his point, the heavy hitters, so to speak, of the Indo-European origins of Burushaski. And we have those ideas summarised here. A 4-gender system, case endings, M interrogatives, postpositions, affixes, adjectives, S mobile, and lexical correspondences. Let's examine some of these a little closer. So Chashule notes that at first it might appear that the Indo-European 3-gender system, developing from an earlier 2-gender system, is incompatible with Burushaski's 4 genders. However, Chashule cites a single 2011 paper which provides evidence for a 4-gender system in the Romance languages. The article itself is actually well worth a read, so please do check it out. But in terms of Burushaski, long story short, the authors argue that the neuter gender has been shown to split into 2 due to instability in the 3-gender system. In fact, the authors explicitly highlight the similarities between the Burushaski 4-gender system and the previously unnoticed 4-gender systems of some Indo-European tongues. Moving on to case endings, Chashula notes the strong parallels between Indo-European and Burushaski. So let's take a look at the case systems side by side. And now let's see how Chashula marries them up. Now the absolutive, Chashula sees this as corresponding to the nominative case in Proto-Indo-European and lists several nouns as evidence. The Burushaski ablative corresponds to the Indo-European instrumental case, not in its traditional form, but in the ending observed in Slavic, which Backus considers a contaminated dative plural. And the opposite correspondence is found with the Proto-Indo-European ablative, which corresponds to the Burushaski instrumental. The parallels seem quite neat and tidy, and I get the feeling after reading Chashula's work that he considers the parallels here to be one of the proposal's stronger arguments. But there is one key difference here that perhaps you've already noticed. Burushaski case endings are the same for both singular and plural. In fact, plurals in Burushaski are marked, as I mentioned earlier, by a large number, some say over 50, suffixes. So make of this what you will. Here on screen now, we can see some examples of the remaining correspondences between Burushaski and Indo-European. Note here, however, that with the M interrogative, that a number of Eurasian languages have similar forms. So parallels here aren't necessarily indicative of a closer relationship between Burushaski and Indo-European. Now what's interesting is that critics of the proposal, like Benston and Blazek, don't rule out an ancient connection between Burushaski and Indo-European. And to be honest, with a lot of these proto-macro language proposals, whether it be Indo-Uralic, Proto-Pontic or Proto-Indo-Eoskarian, reviewers and critics often say something similar. There probably is some connection way back in time. Maybe some of these correspondences reflect that, but some are likely pure coincidence. So how does Chashula justify his proposal of a more significant and recent connection between the two languages? Well, the answer lies in vocabulary. Chashula proposes a significant number of lexical correspondences throughout his work, but we're going to focus on 4 key areas: kinship terms, parts of the body, shepherd vocabulary, and the few terms Chashula proposes that are shared with Phrygian. Let's take a look at the kinship terms. The most significant point here is that Chashula believes that the Indo-European kinship ending that we see here is reflected in Burushaski. Chashula notes the presence of the following suffix, with some variants, that are used exclusively in Burushaski concerning words denoting relations. Moving on, regarding body parts, Chashula has identified around 70 shared terms in his 2016 article. Such a large number of correspondences would indeed be impressive, but just how good are they? Well, let's take a look. Note the correspondence between hand in Burushaski and the Balto-Slavic equivalent. And next we have what Chashula calls shepherd vocabulary, 30 terms, 10 of which are Balkan in origin. Probably the most striking of which is the correspondence for the Burushaski term for sheep and the Indo-European equivalent. We also have shared terms for goat. And here are terms specifically shared with the Balkans. The proposed Phrygian correspondences are intriguing. Chashule proposes that the Burushaski word chagin for dragon corresponds directly with the Phrygian, meaning Lamia, a female demon of antiquity that has often been given serpentine or dragoness-like qualities. Check out Daniel Ogden's 2013 book if you'd like to learn more about Lamia and other dragons and serpents from the classical world. Chashule cites Diakonov and Nierozhnak, 1985, for the underlying meaning of the Phrygian term being silver knowing. The writers indicate that in antiquity, snake-like creatures often guarded treasure. Now let's just rewind for a second and recall the Burushaski folk tale from the beginning of the video. Well, that was about a dragon with precious metal hidden inside its innards. Interesting to say the least. Chashule does his best to argue that there is no evidence that the Burushaski term is borrowed from a neighbouring Indo-Aryan language. However, it's still obviously possible. Chashule provides a number of other correspondences with Phrygian, but perhaps none are as strong as the parallels between the terms for dragon. Chashule also presents us with some close correspondences between personal names in Phrygian and Burushaski, as we can see on screen now. Now, I've done a video on Phrygian, so please go and check that out if you haven't watched it already. But for those that don't know, we only have fragmentary evidence of the Phrygian language, and there is still much that we don't know about it. So, I think we need to be careful with any conclusions we draw based on Phrygian data. So, we've got the same kind of mixture that we've had in previous videos. Some structural correspondences, some morphological correspondences, some correspondences in terms of vocabulary, and that is the essence of Chashule's proposal of the Indo-European origin of Burushaski. Now, there will be at least one other video on Burushaski. I'm actually just waiting for a book to be delivered. Whenever that book's delivered, it could be next week, 2 weeks, a month, I'll begin making that video. But I'm interested what your opinion is concerning the Indo-European origins of Burushaski. Do you think there's anything to it? Now, obviously, we haven't been able to talk about all of the ideas in Chashule's work because there's 16 rather extensive papers at least. So as always, I do recommend people who are interested in this type of stuff just to go and read the papers, check out the papers for yourselves, because there is lots of interesting stuff in there and some truly curious correspondences. Now, we've seen a handful of similar proposals on this channel over the past few weeks. We've had Blevins's Proto-Indo-European Eoskarian, Colorusso's Proto-Pontic, the Indo-Uralic hypothesis, things like this. And it's a, like I said, similar type of story. Some positives to the proposal, some weaknesses. I guess the question is, does Chashule's Indo-European origin of Burushaski have any more weight to it than, let's say, Colorusso's Proto-Pontic or Blevins's Proto-Indo-European Eoskarian? It is really difficult to say. And of course, the work is constantly progressing. Every few years, he's adding to the body of material available, responding to criticism, stuff like that. And, it develops. But at the moment, it's just difficult for me to say whether it's any better or any more convincing than the other proposals we've looked at recently. What I will say is that I don't think that Burushaski fits into Dené-Caucasian. It feels to me as if it's just kind of been lumped into the hypothesis because it's a language isolate and it shares some similarities. What I think what might be going on is that Burushaski might have undergone a similar type of substrate influence like Indo-European did from the Caucasian languages. And this is what gives Burushaski its Caucasian-like appearance that the supporters of the Dené-Caucasian hypothesis are actually seeing. And of course, if we combine that with the idea of other researchers that Burushaski might have been participant in the same migration or wave of migrations as the Indo-Aryan speakers, then maybe that's what Chashule is detecting here. he's detecting a Caucasian-like or Caucasian intermediary substrate alongside just a long time of close contact with the Indo-Aryan languages. And this is what gives Burushaski its Caucasian-like appearance, which is being detected by some scholars, and its Indo-European-like appearance, which is being detected by scholars like Chashule. That, however, is just my idea. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't really have anything to substantiate it. Like I said, I'd be really interested in your opinions, because always in my videos I'm really happy with the kind of input that we have from people and the dialogue that we have in the comment section and the interesting ideas that people raise and that people bring up. So that's all from me for today. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you know anybody who might want to watch this video, please share it with them. I'll be back very soon with another interesting video. You've been fantastic, as you always are. I've been Learn Hittite. Goodbye for now.